Hello and welcome to the Old Garage number 41. I'm Wild Bill and we've got questions and some answers. We've got silliness and we've got shout out going on. So let's get on to it. Now, first question I have, this came from Merrick Blackmore, and he asks, you have a warm, sunny country. Why do you only have 1% electricity generated from solar? Okay. First of all, let me make two caveats. First, I am not an expert in the power grid generation of the United States. I'm an automotive historian. And secondly, I was talking specifically about the actual national public power grid and not the privately owned solars, because there's actually quite a bit of those. There's companies that sell solar panels to homeowners all over the U.S. And that wasn't what I was referring to. But you're right, the U.S. is a big, warm, sunny country, but not all of it is suitable for effective solar generation at a scale that would make sense. You know, let's say you want to power a city of 100,000 people with a solar generator. Well, you're only going to give you two options with solar, either solar panels or you're going to have a solar steam generator. It's going to be one of those two, both of which are not easy to build. Especially the solar steam generator, because basically it's like using the Archimedes mirrors, and so you have all of these mirrors that are basically turning the landscape around this big tower into a giant clock that aims the mirrors at this tower to generate steam. And then of course you have the solar panels that we all know and love. Well, if you're gonna have a plant that can actually support 100,000 people, that's a lot of solar panels, and there's really only a few places in the United States where you're going to have enough sun because of the very low precipitation to make it really worthwhile, and that's going to be in the deserts of the American Southwest, and that's where any most significant solar panel generation attempts have been done. But that's a very harsh environment, and so it's going to take a lot of maintenance and repair to keep either type of solar plant going. And secondly, especially with the solar panels, it's going to take a lot of them. We're talking in the order of square miles of panels in order to generate enough power to supply a city of 100,000 people with its industry and everything else. And that just the maintenance requirements and the construction requirements are so great. It doesn't make any sense. You're not going to make enough money off of the electricity itself to really support the requirements of the plant. So that's really why they haven't been done. I mean, out in the U.S., there's lots of conventional type plants burning fossil fuels, and even some doing burning wood. You have nuclear plants, you have hydroelectric plants, a lot of wind farms out in the West too. They're a lot more sustainable than solar at this time. And the technology as it grows with solar panels and such, I'm sure that'll change. But right now it's just not feasible, and so it's just not done. Okay, next question is on the William Metzger episode, and this was from James MacArthur. And he says at 4:32 in the video, you have a picture of a building, and on it, one of the signs says rentals. Just how long ago were people renting cars? Do any of the big rental companies have their roots back into the vintage era? I guess I never thought you could rent one so long ago. Okay, yeah, car rentals have been around about as long as cars have. A large percentage of the early automotive industry in Europe and America and pretty much everywhere was grown from the bicycle industry. And in that industry, you had very much a similar situation. You had factories making bikes, and then you had dealerships selling bicycles. And at the dealership level, most dealers would sell their bikes as well as rent them, because it was very common, to take public transportation, like a train or a trolley or something, to a location, and then walk or rent a bicycle. for the day to go and run whatever errands you were going to do, and then you return at the end of the day and head back on your train. And so those type of arrangements have been around since before the car. And so when these bike dealerships began to offer cars, because the bike manufacturers were now offering them too, they just naturally offered them as rentals too. It was already part of the business model. It's been going on since the early 1890s. So yeah, there's no surprise there about the rentals. They've been going on, since before the turn of the 20th century. Now, as far as a big rental company that has their roots back in the vintage era, oh yeah. I'll just mention one of them. Let's talk about Hertz for a second. Now, don't worry, they're going to get an episode, but it's probably going to be another 2.5 years before I get to it, so this isn't going to be too much of a spoiler. Hertz was the first company in the world ever to begin manufacturing cars specifically to only rent them. They did not sell cars. They started making cars in 1925, the Hertz, and using dealership networks that were there, they simply offered the Hertz car as rentals. And they did this for about 3 years until they expanded their own dealer network to the point where their franchise network, that they really didn't need to make cars anymore, because they only made one. It was an assembled car, but a good one. It was a solidly made assembled car, of course, being one where the major components are purchased from other companies, and then they put them together. And they picked some good stuff. Continental engines. They were using Stewart Warner instrumentation, et cetera, et cetera. I think they had Packard transmissions. But by 1927, Hertz was done building cars, just because it made sense for them to buy other manufacturers' cars and just offer them straight to rent brand new, because they made one model of car, and it was a nice car. However, if you need to rent a car, there's many different reasons why you may need to rent a car, and so that one model may not fit everybody's application. So it made more sense to Hertz to have small cars, big cars, limousines, pickup trucks, vans, and just expand what they offered, so whatever you needed would be available. But yeah, Hertz, they'll get their episode. Give it time. Okay, next question came from the Ten Van Zugland episode, and James Carthigan says, interesting that his wife was a Rothschild. Did any of the magnates of the eras, like Rothschilds, Morgans, Rockefellers, and others, have a significant influence on vintage car history? Oh yeah, they did. I've already talked about some of them, like the Clarks and Vanderbilts. And then, of course, Rothschilds, Morgans, Rockefellers, my word, you've got the DuPonts, you've got Carnegie. Yeah, there's a lot. We're going to hear more about them, don't worry. I'll get to them. But there were a lot, and their episodes are to come. Okay, and from the episode on Brooklands, I have another question, again, James McCarthy. And he asks, at the 3-minute mark, is that a steam car in front of a sign advertising electric cars? If so, is there some irony there? Well, it's actually not a steam car, and it's not an electric car. It's a gas-powered car. Here's the picture. And the picture is actually from the 1907 Ardennes Circuit Grand Prix, which was held in Belgium. So this is just one of the race cars, number 12, in the race. And it's just speeding by as it's going through its a checkpoint. The car itself is gas-powered. It's a 4-cylinder, 9-liter, 1907 Gaggenau, which also known as SAF. A small German manufacturer. They made touring cars, race cars, obviously, utility vehicles, etc. They lasted till about 1911 as a company, but that's what that car is. But it brings up an interesting thought, and that is that there's lots of these little companies, like thousands of them, that were flashes in the pan. They lasted for only a few years. They made perhaps some interesting vehicles, but there's just not either enough information or not enough meat on the bone with them to warrant giving them a full episode. So, maybe once in a while doing an episode of just a particular region or a special of the little guys that were there, the little guys of South Germany or of South Belgium or of Indiana or something like that. Let me know in the comments what you think. Okay. All right. This was a question actually from the Last Old Garage. Zippy DeStrange has this one. And he says, what does Irn Bru taste like from an American soda perspective? Well, the thing is that what I purchased was not diet soda. It wasn't sugar-free. I mean, I got the full octane. I mean, to me, diet soda is like alcoholic-free beer or decaffeinated coffee. What's the point? But it actually tastes nonetheless like a diet. It's got that chalkiness to it. About the closest thing, to an American soda I can compare it to would be a Diet Crush. But it's just a citrusy, chalky beverage. Some people like that. And it tastes too much like the diet drinks, and I just don't like those. So from American soda perspective, that's my take on Irn Bru. Okay, that's the question. So let's do some silliness here. Now, recently in the news, a classic car has been getting some bad press, but not for the fault of the car itself. The car itself is a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette. It's a nice classic car, very collectible. It's not the car's fault that it was owned by Joe Biden when he made a fool of himself in Honolulu. So that's not the car's fault. So therefore, I started to think, were there any cars in the vintage era that got the Biden's Corvette treatment, that for no fault of their own just got bad press? And so we're going to go through my top 5 list of these. We're going to start, number 5 is going to be any Ford Motor Company product built from 1903 to 1911. Now, the reason for this is quite simple, because this is during the time of the Selden trials. Both in the courts and in the streets, Ford and Alum were battling it out. And the press that was sent out on the support of the Alum side was very much trying to rally the people into Bud Lighting Ford, before Bud Lighting was even heard of. But it didn't work. It did cause a polarizing in the overall public regarding Ford, but it became, you either became a diehard Ford fan or you loved the Alum cars, and that's all they really accomplished. But it turns out that they ended up liking Ford better. So the plan didn't work. Didn't work all that well. But boy, did the Fords and the Model Ts, when they first came out, boy, did they get some bad press from the Alum supporters. So that's my number 5. Number 4 is going to be Marceau Renault's Renault. Now, this was at the 1903 Paris and Madrid. Both Louis Renault and Marceau raced their own race cars in this. Marceau was in an accident. Exactly how the accident went down, it's still debated, the fine points, but end result was he was thrown from the car and badly injured, head injury, etc. He was in a coma, and he died 2 days later. He never came out of the coma. And this was perhaps the most infamous of the crashes that happened during that ill-fated race, and it was featured a lot, and a lot of bad press about racing and auto racing and race cars, and all sorts of crazy accusations were flying around because of losing control of that vehicle and that accident happening. It wasn't the car's fault, but it certainly was a tragedy. But yeah, definitely the whole car industry and racing in particular suffered for a number of years after that. So that's my number 4. Okay, number 3 is going to be Ford's, going back to Ford, but now we're going to 1902. And we're going to be his race car 999. Now, this car got some bad press in 1903, and it was because there was a race, I think it was in September, that the man who was driving it was Frank Day, and lost control, and he was killed in 999. And what Ford did is Ford bought the car back and rebuilt it and put it back on the race circuit, and a lot of people were very offended by that. And the fact that Ford would take this car that this man died in and just rebuild it and throw it back on the road, it just, some of in the press called it the Red Devil, and not in a good way. They just, it wasn't the car's fault, but it was another year before 999. The new 999, after it got rebuilt, actually got some decent press when Ford managed to capture the land speed record with it. But yeah, 999, it got some bad press. Okay, number 2. Okay, this is interesting. This is going to be the 1911 Mercedes model 3790 that was owned by Tsar Nicholas II. Now, this particular car was still in the possession of the Romanovs during the October Revolution. And after what happened to the Romanovs, this particular car got vilified as a symbol of their opulence. They took it out into the courtyard, and they ran all over it, vandalized it, photographed it, and it ended up disappearing. And so, yeah, this car got trashed because it happened to be owned by Tsar Nicholas II. So that's my number 2. Number 1 car that suffered the most from Biden's Corvette syndrome is going to be the car in which the 1910 Grafenstief double phaeton in which Archduke Ferdinand and his wife were murdered. Now, keep in mind, this car was actually not owned by the Archduke. It was actually owned by Count Franz von Harrach. He was a friend of the Archduke, and he loaned him the car for the occasion. But, of course, the car was on display. It was photographed, in the press. Look at the blood of our sovereign, soaked in the seat of this car, sort of thing. You had that happening, and then over the next few years, the car was sold to various new owners, and the press began to report about the untimely deaths of the car's new owners, and it wasn't the car's fault for their owners' untimely deaths. I mean, and frankly, that just happens. But suddenly, the car became cursed in the press. And so, yeah, and it was neglected for a long time. But then it's now preserved. I mean, it's in original condition. It hasn't been restored, to my knowledge, and I think it's in Austria somewhere. But yeah, that car got a lot of bad press for a long time. So that's my number 1. So now it's shout out time, and boy, have we caught a cool one. You're going to like this. You like videos about cars? We'll have videos of cars. And if you want to check out some cool ones, it's Matt's Car Videos. You can go over there and binge watch for a good long time of original footage of all kinds of different car stuff from the early 20th century going up to the 30s and 40s. It's a good watch. Go check them out. Like and subscribe. You know the routine. So that's what we have for the old garage today, and we will see you next time. Peace.